The Ohio Shakespeare Quarantine Radio Program starts now.
Good evening, everyone. I'm your host, Avon Corto, and welcome to the Ohio Shakespeare Quarantine Radio Program, where we produce original works based on classic stories for your at-home entertainment. So grab your quarantine pal, your favorite adult beverage, or maybe a glass of chocolatey Ovaltine for the kiddos, and settle in for some old-fashioned radio play spookums. Tonight's tale is based on the classic stories by Baroness Emma Orczy, adapted for our radio program by Julia Fisher. It is sure to remind us that sometimes the latest fashion trends can hide something deadly. Joining us tonight from the Ohio Shakespeare Festival Company are Rachel Maria Inés as Mary Granard, Madelyn Hayes as Lady Molly Robertson-Kirk, James Rankin as Constable, Chief, Tim Keogh as Saunders, Butler, John Peters as Dr. Townsend, Magistrate, Allison Osborne Nurse as Lady Irene, Natalie Steen as Lily, Catherine, DeLee Cooper as Dorothy, Nell, and Tess Burglar as Mrs. Steinberg, Elizabeth. And now, Ohio Shakespeare Festival presents Baroness Emma Orczy's Lady Molly of Scotland Yard, The Murder at Mathis Cafe.
Would you like a refill on that hot chocolate, sir? Or something to eat? I can bring you the menu if you'd like. Are you still asleep? I figured as much, but I thought I'd offer in case you were awake. Don't worry, sir. You can sleep as long as you like. I certainly understand. It is quite cozy in here today with the music and the snow outside. Sir, since you're asleep, would you mind if I stayed here a moment? It's been awful busy the last few hours, and if I could just stand here and catch my breath. Oh, my feet ache. The most horrid couple over there keeps changing their mind about what they want and then blaming me when their new order isn't ready in an instant. If any of my young ones grow up to be that rude, well, they won't. That's the point. See, now you were very polite. Asked my name, made small talk, quite the gentleman. If only your lady friend would have left that incredible hat behind when she went out. If I had a hat that large to hide under too, I could really take a break. Oh dear, the couple is glaring at me. I'd better continue on. Enjoy your nap, sir. Here, before I leave, why don't I take that mug for you? I'll bring a fresh refill when you wake up. Grace, come quick!
Lady Molly always had the idea that if the finger of fate had pointed us to Mathis Cafe in Regent Street, rather than to Lyons, as the most advisable place for us to have a cup of tea that afternoon, Mr. Culloden would be alive at the present moment. My dear lady is quite sure, and needless to say I share her belief in herself, that she would have anticipated the murderer's intentions, and would have thus prevented one of the most cruel and callous of crimes which were ever perpetrated in the heart of London. Since our first adventure together in Ninescore, Lady Molly and I had become inseparable partners. Her brilliant deductive mind and remarkable intuition, matched with my research and note-taking skills and ability to rather disappear into any room or situation, let's just say we had made quite a name for ourselves. And if I sometimes imagined a world where Lady Molly and I were more than just partners and friends, well, no matter. I was sure she did not entertain similar thoughts, and I was likewise confident that she had no glimpse into my own. So I resolved myself to think on it no more, and to be glad with our friendship. Lady Molly and I had been to a matinee of Trilby, an adaptation of the novel by George du Maurier, and were having tea at Lions Cafe, which is exactly opposite the Viennese Mathis Cafe. From where we sat, we commanded a view of the street and of the cafe, which had been very crowded during the last hour. We had lingered over our toasted muffin until past 6, Lady Molly's graceful features aglow in the candlelight as she spiritedly analyzed the play we had seen.
Yes, it was clever, but I don't believe all those men were in love with her.
Oh, I do.
Mary, look!
Where am I looking?
Across the street. Mathis Cafe. A moment ago, 2 men sprinted out of the doorway. Now all of the customers are leaving, and the 2 men are headed back with an officer.
Is that Inspector Saunders?
Quick, Mary, before the crowd grows unmanageable.
Oh, okay. Did you remember...
Yes, I've paid the bill. Keep up.
Pardon me. Excuse me.
Excuse me.
Pardon
Sorry.
me, sir.
Sorry, mums. I'm afraid you won't be able to have your tea here this afternoon. We've just sent everyone out.
Lady Molly Robertson-Kirk of Scotland Yard.
And Mary Granard, also of Scotland Yard.
Oh, yes, I see. My apologies, mums. Please, come in.
Lady Molly? And Miss Mary, here already? I suppose I'm not surprised. You can always smell the good ones, can't you? The Chief just suggested sending for you. He was about to ring you when I got off the phone with him. He said that since there's a woman wrapped up in this case, we shall need to rely on you a great deal. Mysterious creatures, eh?
What happened?
Well, as you can see, we have a body over there.
Oh, my.
Middle-aged man, not identified yet. They found him slumped over in his booth, dead. Dr. Townsend is working on him, as you see, and will be able to give us his opinion soon. I've only a few stray particulars, but the chief witness is that waitress over there. Name's Nell Boyle. I was just getting started with her when I saw you come in. Follow me. All right then, Nell. This here is Lady Molly Robertson-Kirk and her partner, Miss Mary Granard, from the female department. They'll be helping with this investigation. Of course, I got here first, but sometimes you just need a lady's touch. Am I right?
Hello, Mum.
Hello, Nell.
Let's start from the top again, shall we? When did this all occur?
I can't say. The gentleman, rest his soul, came in very early with a lady, somewhere about 4. They made straight for this alcove. The place was just beginning to fill, and the music had begun.
And where is the lady now?
She went off almost directly. She had ordered tea for herself and a cup of chocolate for the gentleman. About 5 minutes afterwards, as I went past the table, I heard her say to him, "I'm afraid I must go now. A Jay's will be closed, but I'll be back in less than half an hour. You'll wait for me, won't you?"
Did the gentleman seem all right then?
Oh, yes, he had just begun to sip his chocolate and merely said so long as she gathered up her gloves and muff and then went out of the shop.
And she has not returned since?
No.
When did you first notice there was anything wrong with this gentleman?
Well, I looked at him once or twice as I went up and down, for he certainly seemed to have fallen all of a heap. Of course, I thought he had gone to sleep, and I spoke to Grace, the manageress, about him, but she thought that I ought to leave him alone for a bit. But then we got very busy, and I paid no more attention to him until about 6 o'clock, when most afternoon tea customers had gone, and we were beginning to get the tables ready for dinners. I paused at his table for a moment just to catch my breath. When I took his mug from him, he slumped over onto the table, and I could tell there was something very wrong. I called to Grace, and she sent for the police.
And the lady who was with him at first, what was she like? Would you know her again?
I don't know. You see, I have to attend to such crowds of people in an afternoon, I can't notice each one in great detail. And she had on one of those enormous mushroom hats. No one could have seen a face, not more than a chin, unless they looked right under the hat.
Would you know the hat again?
Yes, I think I should. It was black velvet and had a lot of plumes. It was enormous.
Looks like Dr. Townsend is finishing up. Let's see what he thinks.
Thank you, Nell.
Lady Molly, Miss Mary, good to see you both.
You too, Dr. Townsend.
What's your verdict?
The whole matter is simple enough so far as I am concerned. Man has been killed by a terrific dose of morphia, administered, no doubt, in this cup of hot chocolate.
Killed by hot chocolate? How tragic.
Any identification?
In his pockets were this letter case with several letters addressed to Mark Culloden, Esquire, some with an address in Lombard Street, others with one in Fitzjohn's Avenue, Hampstead. The silver mount of the letter case has the initials MC, as does his hat, so the identity appears confirmed.
Mark Culloden, Esquire.
The Lombard Street address is his office, I presume, and Fitzjohn's Avenue would be his house.
That would make sense.
A house in Fitzjohn's Avenue does not suggest a bachelor establishment. I suspect this man has a family, a wife at least.
We can send men there now to break the news.
No, let me and Mary do it. You can go search his office.
As you wish.
Thank you, Inspector. And you too, Doctor.
Lady Molly and I drove together to Fitzjohn's Avenue. She leaned in close to me and spoke in quick, hushed tones, her fervent whispers as intoxicating as the promise of a new case. 20 minutes later, we arrived at a lovely brick home with white trim and grand steps.
Here we are, Mary.
How do you tell someone their family member is dead?
I suppose we'll have to figure it out. Deep breaths, and...
Good evening, Culloden residents.
Good evening. Lady Molly Robertson-Kirk of Scotland Yard, and this is my partner, Mary Granard. Is this the residence of Mark Culloden?
Yes, Mum. Mr. Culloden is not in right now, but his wife, Lady Irene, is in the drawing room.
Could you take us to her, please?
Certainly. Right this way.
What do you think he's doing? I'm so excited to hear.
Who is that?
Just the servants, Mum. Silly young things. Lady Culloden, 2 women are here for you. Lady Molly Robertson-Kirk and Miss Mary Granard, from Scotland Yard.
Thank you. Please, come in. You're from Scotland Yard. Has something happened?
I'm afraid so. I won't keep you in suspense, Lady Irene. I have come here straight from Mathis Cafe, where your husband was found dead.
What? My Mark?
Yes. We identified the body as Mark Culloden, although we will of course ask you to identify it as well.
What happened to him?
We believe he was poisoned.
Oh,
Through morphia slipped into a cup of chocolate.
my poor, sweet Mark. Who could have done such a thing?
We don't know. We will have questions for you.
Of course. I will do whatever I can to help find this monster.
Thank you, Mum. I know this is quite a shock. Do you know if your husband had any enemies?
No, of course he didn't. Mark is always... He was the one who held his family together, you know? Even when the rest of them were upset with each other, he was the one who could get them all to laugh and not take themselves quite so seriously. He was... Forgive me, I need a moment.
Of course. We're so sorry again for your loss. You can come down to the station tomorrow and we can finish this there.
Thank you.
Yes, Mum?
Please show them out. Good day, ladies.
Good day. That poor, poor woman.
How old is she, might I ask?
Just short of 25, my lady.
And looks even younger.
And so frail. I imagine her tiny figure might collapse under the weight of her grief.
Grief, Mums?
Now that we've told Lady Irene, I suppose we should tell you. The master of the house has been found this afternoon, murdered.
Good heavens! Murdered?
Yes, or so the evidence suggests.
Oh, Mark! Oh, the horror of it all!
Can conversation be overheard from here?
No, I'm sure it was those dratted girls spying about.
Who is that crying?
Mrs. Steinberg. She's Mr. Culloden's aunt, and she's been deathly ill the last few months. She's living with the Cullodens for the moment. I better go check on her.
May we accompany you?
I suppose you'll need to speak with her eventually, and I'm sure she won't be well enough to visit the station. Follow me.
I'm so sorry, Mr. Steinberg. We thought you'd want to know.
You may enter.
Mum, 2 women from Scotland Yard are here and would like to speak with your...
Dorothy, it's the lady detectives.
You may send them in.
Lady Molly Robertson-Kirk and Miss Mary Granard, Mum.
I suppose you're here about my Mark.
Yes, Mum.
These 2 already told me.
We're so sorry.
We were in the pantry connected to the drawing room and we overheard.
We thought Mr. Steinberg should know.
Seeing as how he's a favourite and all.
Did we ruin your detective work?
Oh no, I didn't think about that. Lily, we've ruined the investigation.
We're so sorry.
We have a high opinion of detective work.
Girls, it's quite all right. You haven't ruined anything. Mr. Steinberg, we want to offer our deepest condolences.
I wish to make a statement. I cannot have anyone soiling Mark's good name.
Of course, Mrs. Steinberg.
I'll make note of what you say.
Mark Culloden was the one nephew whom I loved. I have shown my love to him by bequeathing to him the large fortune which I inherited from the late Mr. Steinberg. Mark was the soul of honor, or I would have cut him out of my will as I did my other nephews and nieces. I was brought up in a Scotch home, and I hate all this modern fastness and smartness, which are all other words for what I call prolificacy. All of my other nephews and nieces failed to live up to our family's honor, but Mark was always the perfect gentleman. He married well, which, as everyone knows, is the height of good judgment, and he took good care of me. There is no one in the world who could think ill of Mark.
That was beautiful, Mrs. Steinberg.
You've made me weep, Mrs. Steinberg.
Thank you for your statement. We will be in touch as soon as we know more. And if you can think of anything else that might help us, please do not hesitate to call.
Yes.
Girls, would you mind walking me and Miss Mary back down to the front hall?
Of course.
We'd love to.
We'll be back, Mrs. Steinberg.
If there's anything else you need. We're so sorry again, Mum.
No need to apologize.
So we didn't ruin your detective work?
No, I wouldn't say that you did.
Oh, good.
I can't believe there are lady detectives.
There's a whole department of us, actually.
Now, what would be helpful, girls, is if you could tell us what you know about the Culloden family. Why did Mrs. Steinberg disown all of the other members of her family?
That's just how she is, you know. Anything could set her off.
One cousin joined the theatre.
One attended too many parties.
One attended too few parties.
Mr. Culloden's younger sister was caught wearing a one-piece bathing suit.
Oh, that was a scandal.
His brother married a French woman.
Another cousin married a lamplighter.
Another married a milkman.
So she has strong ideas about marriage.
Oh, yes. She has strong ideas about everything.
Do you think any of these siblings or cousins are upset with Mr. Culloden for being the only one who kept her in favour?
I don't think so.
Everyone liked Mr. Culloden. He still talked to all of his family, just not when Mrs. Steinberg was around.
And what about Lady Irene? How long have they been married?
Only 6 months.
Oh, that's dreadful.
She's the daughter of an earl who wasn't too pleased with the marriage.
Her family had plenty of high connections, but no money.
Well, his family had plenty of money, but no connections.
So her family looked down on him.
But his family, meaning Mrs. Steinberg, was quite fond of her.
Or at least her family name.
And that was good enough for Mr. Culloden.
I can't imagine how Our Lady's feeling.
She must be simply devastated.
Only 6 months of marriage.
Have either of you been with this family for very long?
All of us here were hired after Mr. Culloden and Lady Culloden came back from their honeymoon.
And some of us even more recently than that.
Thank you both. Please give us a ring down at the station if you can think of anything else we should know, will you?
Oh, yes.
Oh, we could be accomplices.
But that's not the right word.
Oh, informants.
I think you mean witnesses.
Oh,
You've been a huge help, girls. Thank you so much for your time and your insight.
oh, we have insight.
All right, hush you. You're going to scare them away. We wish you the best of luck with your case.
Have a good day, and we are sorry to bring you such sad news. Lady Molly and I spent the next few days tracking down and speaking to every brother and sister and cousin of Mark Culloden, but there did not appear to have been any ill feeling in the family against him. They all said that Mrs. Steinberg was sole mistress of her fortune, and she might just as well have bequeathed it in toto to some hospital as to one particular nephew whom she favored. The various relations had been glad, on the whole, that the money was going to remain in the family rather than be cast abroad. The mystery surrounding the woman in the big hat deepened as the days went by. As you know, the longer the period of time which elapses between a crime and the identification of the criminal, the greater chance the criminal has of remaining at large. In spite of strenuous efforts and close questionings of every one of the employees at Mathis Cafe, no one could give a very accurate description of the lady who had tea with the deceased on that fateful afternoon. The only thing that stood out in anyone's mind was her enormous hat. The first glimmer of light on the mysterious occurrence was thrown, about a week later, by a young woman named Catherine Harris, who had been parlour-maid to Mr. and Lady Irene Culloden when they first returned from their honeymoon. I must tell you that Mrs. Steinberg died a few days after we saw her. The excitement had been too much for her enfeebled heart. I felt another ache of sorrow for poor Lady Irene. How her slight figure could bear such a multitude of sorrows, I could hardly imagine. Just before her death, Mrs. Steinberg had deposited £250 with her banker, which sum was to be paid over to any persons giving information which could lead to the apprehension and conviction of the murderer of Mr. Mark Culloden. This offer had stimulated everyone's zeal, and I presume had aroused Catherine Harris to a realization of what had all the while been her obvious duty. Lady Molly and I were discussing the case with the chief in his office when Catherine Harris was shown in.
A real police station, how grand!
Miss Harris, you have information about Mr. Culloden's death.
Yes, maybe.
How did you know Mr. Culloden, Catherine?
For a very short time I was a parlour-maid to Mr. and Lady Culloden. I began like everyone else when they returned from their honeymoon, and just 1 week later there was a visitor for Mr. Culloden, a foreign lady. But the butler was out for the afternoon, so I was the one who let her in and showed her to Mr. Culloden's smoking room.
Did she give a name?
Of course not, or I had said it already. I beg your pardon, I'm simply nervous.
It's all right, Miss Harris. What did she look like?
She was a very handsome lady and was beautifully dressed.
Did she wear a large hat?
I don't remember if it was particularly large.
But you remember what the lady was like?
Yes, pretty well. She was very, very tall and very good-looking. She also smelled divine.
Sounds like your type, Mary.
What?
Would you know her again if you saw her?
Oh, yes, I think so.
And what happened next?
The lady had been closeted with Mr. Culloden for about an hour when Lady Culloden came home. I let her in, and since she didn't ask me any questions, I didn't mention that Mr. Culloden had a visitor. I went back to the servants' hall, and 5 minutes later the smoking room bell rang, and I ran up to it. The foreign lady was in the hall alone, and obviously waiting to be shown out. I did so, and when I came back, Mr. Culloden had come out of the smoking room, and he went on dreadful.
What do you mean by that?
I didn't know I had done anything so very wrong, but the master seemed quite furious and said I wasn't a proper parlour-maid, or I'd have known that visitors must not be shown in straight away like that. I ought to have said to the lady I didn't know if Mr. Culloden was in, that I would go and see. Oh, did he go on at me! Everyone says they love Mr. Culloden, but that's only because they've never seen him when he's displeased, and I supposed he complained to the mistress, for she gave me notice next day.
And you have never seen them since?
No, neither the Cullodens nor the foreign lady.
How did you know she was foreign? Did she have an accent?
I'm not sure. She did not say much, only asked for Mr. Culloden, but she looked French-like.
I see.
If the foreign lady is hanged for murder, will I get the £250?
You certainly will.
Smashing.
Thank you, Miss Harris. That will be all for now.
£250?
Well, I suppose Saunders will want to hear about this.
Saunders?
Well, you didn't think he'd just let go of this case so easily, did you?
I thought since you put us in charge.
Yes, but you know Saunders can't stand people having fun without him.
But, Chief...
Now, don't get yourselves all worked up. Saunders is harmless. You both just keep doing what you do.
Solving a murder? Yes, sir, we plan on it.
Following Catherine Harris's indications, a description of the lady who was wanted in connection with the murder of Mr. Culloden was very widely circulated, and within 2 days of the interview with the ex-parlourmaid, another very momentous one took place in the same office. Lady Molly was at work with the chief over some reports, whilst I was taking shorthand notes at a side desk, when a card was brought in by one of the men, and the next moment, without waiting either for permission to enter or to be more formally announced, a magnificent apparition literally sailed into the dust-covered little back office, filling it with an atmosphere of Parma violets and Russia leather. With one notable exception, I don't think that I had ever seen a more beautiful woman in my life. Tall, with a splendid figure and perfect posture, she vaguely reminded me of the portraits one sees of the late Empress of Austria. This lady was, moreover, dressed to perfection, and wore a large hat adorned with a quantity of plumes. When I caught sight of her name on the card, which the chief had handed to Lady Molly, I identified her at once as Viennese. In my imagination, I have always associated Austrian women with charm, grace, and elegance, and Miss Elizabeth Lowenthal was certainly no exception. The chief had instinctively risen to greet her, whilst Lady Molly, still and poised, was eyeing our visitor with a quizzical smile.
You know who I am, sir. My name is on that card. My appearance, I understand, tallies exactly with that of a woman who is supposed to have murdered Mark Culloden. Don't trouble yourself, sir. My landlady, my servants, my friends have all read the description of the woman who is supposed to have murdered Mr. Culloden. For the past 24 hours I have been watched by your police, therefore I come to you of my own accord, before they came to arrest me in my flat. I am not too soon, am I?
Well, we were about to apply for a warrant this very morning.
I know. But let me tell you at once that I did not murder Mark Culloden. He treated me shamefully, and I would willingly have made a scandal just to spite him. He had become so respectable and straight-laced. But between scandal and murder there is a wide gulf. Don't you think so, madam?
Undoubtedly.
A wide gulf, which, no doubt, Miss Elizabeth Lowenthal will best be able to demonstrate to the magistrate tomorrow.
Now, my dear sir, let us understand one another. I came here for that express purpose. I take it that you don't want your police to look ridiculous any more than I want to gossip. I don't want the detectives to hang around my flat, questioning my neighbors and my servants. They would soon find out that I did not murder Mark Culloden, of course, but the atmosphere of the police would hang around me, and I prefer Parma violets.
Well, then you have come to make a statement.
Yes, I tell you all I know. Mr. Culloden was engaged to marry me. Then he met the daughter of an earl and thought he would like her better as a wife than a simple poor Miss Lowenthal. I suppose I should have been considered an undesirable match for a young man who has a highly snobbish aunt who would leave him all her money only on the condition that he made a suitable marriage. I am a singer, and I came over to England 2 years ago to study English, so that I might sing an oratorio at the Albert Hall. I met Mark on the Calais Dover boat, when he was returning from a holiday abroad. He fell in love with me, and presently he asked me to be his wife. After some demur, I accepted him. We became engaged, but he told me that our engagement must remain a secret, for he had an old aunt from whom he had great expectations, and who might not approve of his marrying a foreign girl, who was without connections and a professional singer. From that moment, I began to mistrust him, so I was not very astonished when gradually his affection for me seemed to cool. Soon after, he informed me, quite carelessly, that he had changed his mind and was going to marry some swell English lady with a respectable family name.
So you were angry at him?
Oh, I didn't care about losing him, but I wanted to punish him for using me so by making a scandal. I went to his house just to worry him, and finally I decided to bring an action for breach of promise against him. I have a number of love letters from him that I believe would argue my case for me. It would have upset him, I know. No doubt his aunt would have cut him out of a will. That is all I wanted, to embarrass him. I did not care about him enough to murder him.
As you say, Miss Lowenthal, the police would have found all this out within the next few hours. Once your connection with the murdered man was known to us, the record of your past and his becomes an easy one to peruse. No doubt, too, our men would soon have been placed in possession of the one indisputable proof of your complete innocence with regard to that fateful afternoon spent at Mathis Cafe.
What is that?
An alibi.
You mean where was I during the time that Mark was being murdered in the tea shop?
Yes.
I was out for a walk.
Shopping, perhaps?
No.
Well, you met someone who would remember the circumstance, or your servants could say at what time you came in.
No, I met no one, for I took a brisk walk on Primrose Hill. My 2 servants could only say that I went out at 3 o'clock that afternoon and returned after 5. That is all I have to tell you. I think I will go home now.
Miss Lowenthal, we have to discuss a series
Let
of
her
things.
go.
What?
Trust me.
I thank you for the helpful information which you have given us. Of course, we may rely on your presence in town for the next few days, may we not?
Of course, sir. Thank you.
As she left, Miss Lowenthal went up to Lady Molly and held out her delicate hand. My dear lady took it without an instant's hesitation. Then Miss Lowenthal swept out of the door in her cloud of Parma violets, and I was left wondering whether the woman I loved best in all the world had been shaking hands with a murderess.
It's easy to listen to these stories and not realize just how many people have been instrumental in breaking down barriers. Here, with a little bit of background, is our playwright, Julia Fisher.
While the heroes of our story, 2 women who work at Scotland Yard in 1910, might seem wildly anachronistic to a modern audience, their story is not too far from reality. Here is a brief and incomplete look at some of the real-life trailblazers of female detection in England. Beginning in 1883, Scotland Yard employed a number of women as matrons, whose role was to guard women and children. In 1910, the year Lady Molly of Scotland Yard was first published, 5 women, including Edith Tancred and Dorothy Peto, began campaigning for the inclusion and requirement of women police. A year later, Edith and Dorothy began unofficial street patrols, which were organized from an office they ran in Bath. In 1914, Nina Boyle and Margaret Damer Dawson founded the Women Police Volunteers, which was later reshaped into the Women's Police Service, or WPS. Margaret Damer Dawson ran the new WPS with Mary Sophia Allen, and together these 2 women opened training schools, designed their own uniforms, and were awarded an Order of the British Empire. Margaret and Mary were also lovers and shared a home together. In 1915, Edith Smith, who had volunteered with the WPS, was appointed the first female police officer in England with full power of arrest. Shortly after, Edith was making £2, 10 shillings a week, which was more than even the oldest male police constable in her force in Lincolnshire, because of the challenging work she was given and an acknowledgement of her additional skills as a qualified nurse. Florence Mildred White became a constable in Salisbury in 1918 and took the same oath and received the same rights, pay, and pension as the male constables. Florence quickly rose through the ranks, becoming one of the first 2 female sergeants in England in 1920, and then the first female inspector in 1930. Just 2 years later, in 1932, Lillian Wiles, the first female detective to work in the heart of London at Scotland Yard, and Dorothy Peto, that early advocate for policewomen, continued to make history as Lillian became England and Scotland Yard's first female chief inspector, and Dorothy became their first female superintendent. It would be quite a bit later, in 1968, that Cicely Fay Allen, England's first policewoman of color, joined Scotland Yard. And just recently, in 2017, Cressida Dick became the first female commissioner of Scotland Yard, leading the whole of the Metropolitan Police Service. All of these women led complex and fascinating lives outside of these brief firsts. If you're interested in hearing some of their stories, Lillian Wiles, Dorothy Peto, and Mary Sophia Allen all wrote memoirs about their time in detection. And, if you're more in the mood for fiction, Nina Boyle wrote a number of her own mystery novels. If you listen carefully to our performance, you may catch a few nods to these real-life detectives in the names of some of the characters we've met. And as you enjoy this fictional tale, you can also remember all of the very real women who inhabited and made possible the world of Lady Molly and Mary.
And now, the conclusion of Lady Molly of Scotland Yard, The Murder at Mathis Cafe.
No doubt you will remember the sensation which was caused by the arrest of Miss Elizabeth Lowenthal on a charge of having murdered Mr. Mark Culloden by administering morphia to him in a cup of chocolate at Mathis Cafe in Regent Street. Against the express wishes and instructions of Lady Molly, Miss Lowenthal had been arrested in her flat by Inspector Saunders and 2 constables. She had loudly protested her innocence as she was taken away, pleading "not guilty" in a firm voice. The beauty of the accused, her undeniable charm of manner, and the hitherto blameless character of her life all tended to make the public take violent sides either for or against her, and the usual budget of amateur correspondence, suggestions, recriminations, and advice poured into the chief's office in titanic proportions. I must say that, personally, all my sympathies went out to Miss Lowenthal. As I have said before, I am no psychologist, but I had seen her in the original interview at the office, and I could not get rid of the absolutely unreasoning certitude that the beautiful Viennese singer was innocent. The Bow Street Magistrates' Court was packed, as you may well imagine, on that first day of the inquiry, and, of course, sympathy with the accused went up to a fever pitch when she staggered into the dock, beautiful still, despite the ravages caused by horror, anxiety, and fear, in face of the deadly peril in which she stood.
Well, Saunders, I certainly hope you have some airtight evidence for bringing this innocent woman to trial.
Just you wait, beautiful. I've been on the force since you were in short clothes. I know what I'm doing.
Oh, so it's standard protocol to arrest someone against the instruction of the lead detectives? I must have missed that in the manual.
Order!
Good luck, Saunders.
I don't need luck. I've got proof.
I see.
This is the preliminary trial of Miss Elizabeth Lowenthal on charges of murder against Mr. Mark Culloden, Esquire. Inspector Saunders, you may begin.
Thank you, Your Worship. Our first witness is Nell Boyle, the waitress who discovered the body of Mr. Culloden. Miss Boyle, tell us what you remember about the appearance of the woman you saw with Mr. Culloden that night.
Sir, all I can remember clearly is that she had a very large, very elaborate hat which hid her face.
If you were to see that hat again, do you think you would recognize it?
I believe so, sir.
Your Worship, I will now present our first exhibit to Miss Boyle. Does this hat look like the one you saw that night?
Yes, sir. It looks exactly like the one on the woman with Mr. Culloden.
So that's what he was all excited about.
It appears so.
This hat was found this morning in the closet of Miss Lowenthal. Your Worship, I'm going to ask Miss Lowenthal to place this hat on her head.
Yes, all right.
Miss Boyle, now that Miss Lowenthal has donned her large hat, do you recognize her as the woman who accompanied Mr. Culloden?
I'm not sure.
You're not sure?
She might have been the lady in question, yet there is a certain something about her which is different somehow.
What is it that's different?
I can't say.
But this is the same hat you believe that the woman wore that day.
Well, sir, when you showed it to me before, I was quite certain. But on Miss Lowenthal, it looks somewhat smaller than I remember.
So you will not identify Miss Lowenthal as the woman you saw?
No, sir, not definitely.
That will be all.
You may call your next witness.
Lady Irene Culloden.
That's what happens when you don't interview your witnesses first.
The look on his face when she refused to identify her.
Lady Culloden, what was your relationship with the deceased?
He was my husband.
I am sorry to bring up painful questions, ma'am, but I must ask you. Did you know of your husband's previous entanglement with Miss Lowenthal?
Yes, I did.
Did you think it fit to make him accountable for his actions?
No, sir, I considered it in the past.
Did you know that Miss Lowenthal had threatened a breach of promise against your husband?
No, sir.
Did you know that Miss Lowenthal had visited your husband multiple times since you were married, once to your house and multiple times to his office?
I knew that she visited the house, sir. I encountered her that day. I did not know she had visited his office.
Did you speak to her the day that she visited your house?
No, sir. I entered the smoking room to greet my husband, and when I saw her talking with him, I walked out. She left immediately after.
Did you hear what they were saying?
No, they were speaking in low voices, and I did not hear any of it.
Did Mr. Culloden speak of Miss Lowenthal after the incident?
No, sir. I could tell he was distressed by her visit, so I did not venture to speak of it.
Thank you, Lady Culloden. We are so sorry for your loss.
Thank you, Inspector.
And finally, I will call to the stand the accused, Miss Elizabeth Lowenthal.
Can't decide if I feel more pity for Lady Irene or Elizabeth.
Well, you generally favour the tall ones, don't you?
I'm sorry?
I'd rather think you'd be more fond of Elizabeth. Lady Irene seems a bit short for your taste.
Well, Elizabeth isn't so tall. She's the same height as you.
Miss Lowenthal, you were previously engaged to Mr. Culloden?
Yes.
And you were angry that he broke off your engagement?
Well, of course.
So angry that you threatened to bring a breach of promise before Mr. Culloden in court?
Yes, but
So angry that you had already begun the proceedings to this effect?
I showed my letters to a lawyer, but...
Are you aware that Mr. Culloden was director of several companies in London?
Yes.
And that one of those companies is a druggist?
Yes.
Did you ever visit his office in Lombard Street?
Yes.
So, you had access to the morphia that is kept in the storage room connected to Mr. Culloden's office? I'll take that as a yes. Miss Lowenthal, I'm sure you know that Mathis Cafe is a Viennese cafe.
What does that have?
And you yourself are Viennese.
How does that possibly?
What were you doing the afternoon that Mr. Culloden was murdered?
I was on a walk, sir.
Alone?
Yes.
Any witnesses to confirm this?
No.
Thank you. As you see, your worship, Miss Lowenthal had both motive and opportunity to murder Mr. Culloden, and she has no alibi. I believe she should be taken prisoner until she can appear before the court in a full trial.
I'm sorry if this gets ugly, Mary.
What are you going
Your
to do?
worship, I would like to request that I be brought forth as a witness.
And who are you?
Lady Molly Robertson-Kirk, your worship. I'm the primary investigator in this case.
So what is Inspector Saunders doing up here?
That is a great question, sir.
May I talk to Lady Molly for a moment?
Yes, please do.
What the hell are you doing?
Trying to save you, you're making a fool of yourself.
You're certainly not helping me look less a fool.
Call me to the stand.
But I didn't even prepare for
It's a
something like
preliminary
this.
hearing. You can call whoever you want. I'm a relevant witness.
Fine, but I'll remember this.
I'm sure you will.
Your worship, I would like to call Lady Molly Robertson-Kirk to the stand.
Proceed.
Now, Lady Molly, what do you find so urgent to share with the court?
Your worship, as a detective at Scotland Yard, as the head investigator of this case, and as someone who was actually present at Miss Lowenthal's first interview, I believe it is evident that Miss Lowenthal is not guilty. Miss Boyle, our only reliable eyewitness to the crime, refuses to identify Miss Lowenthal as the woman in question. Miss Lowenthal told us that she had already begun proceedings for breach of promise against the deceased, and she was in possession of letters that guaranteed she would have had a strong case. When she were in a position to win financial compensation from him, why would she then turn to murder? With no motive, then, and a negative identification by the sole eyewitness, I argue that Miss Lowenthal is not the culprit of this crime.
Thank you, Lady Robertson-Kirk. Although quite unorthodox, I appreciate your perspective. After consideration of all the facts, my ruling is that there is not a sufficiency of evidence against the accused at this time to warrant my committing her for trial. Miss Elizabeth Lowenthal is discharged and may leave the court a free woman.
After the hearing, the mysterious woman in the big hat remained the chief subject of leading articles in the papers, coupled with that of the ineptitude of the police who could not discover her. There were caricatures and picture postcards in all the shop windows of a gigantic hat covering the whole figure of its wearer, only the feet and a very long and pointed chin protruding from beneath the enormous brim. Below was the inscription, "Who is she? Ask the police." Back at Scotland Yard, the chief gave us a half-hearted apology for letting Saunders arrest Elizabeth against Lady Molly's advice. Saunders, of course, refused to speak to us, but that hardly bothered us. A few days later, I came upon Lady Molly pacing outside the chief's door.
Ugh,
"Are you all right, my lady?"
of course I'm not. The chief approved Saunders' ridiculously damaging idea without a second thought, but he's taken 2 whole days to consider mine. I know it must be done, Mary, and I wish to God I could do it without anyone's approval. I can see every detail of that murder just as if I were there.
I know. I believe you. And I believe we will crack this. The chief knows your skill. He will come around.
Oh, Mary, if only everyone could see me as you do. Mary, I know I tease you, but you must know.
Lady Molly, come in.
Yes, Chief.
I scarcely had time to catch my breath and wonder what Lady Molly could have been about to say to me when she flew out of the chief's door, seized my hand, whirled me around and back through the doors, and navigated me neatly into a carriage, which promptly took off. In the carriage, Lady Molly was silent, in that strange transition of manner which to me was so attractive, and to everyone else so unaccountable. She had not let go of my hand since she first pulled me toward the carriage, and I let all of my nerves about the case, the chief, everything, dissolve under the heat of her touch. Her skin crackled with energy, and I glanced up at her face, which was now so near to mine. Her dark eyes were gleaming. There was the power of second sight in them, of her marvelous intuition. Too quickly, we found ourselves arriving at Fitzjohn's Avenue and walking up that driveway for the second time. Behind us, I could hear the arrival of another carriage, but Lady Molly did not seem surprised. When she released our grip to knock on the door, I could still feel the warm imprint of her fingers.
Good morning, mums.
Good morning. Could you please take us to Lady Irene?
Of course, right this way. Lady Molly Robertson-Kirk and Miss Mary Granard, mum.
Yes, come in. And could you bring us some tea?
Of course, mum.
Good morning. What can I do for you?
I most sincerely hope, Lady Irene, that you will look with all possible indulgence on my growing desire, shared, I may say, by all my superiors at Scotland Yard, to elucidate the mystery which still surrounds your late husband's death.
I can understand that the police wish to do their duty in the matter. As for me, I have done all I think that could be expected of me. I am not made of iron, and after that day in the police court, I cannot do any more.
I fully appreciate your feelings in the matter, but you would not mind helping us, would you? In a passive way, if you could, by some simple means, further the cause of justice?
What is it you want me to do?
Only to allow me to ring for 2 of your maids and to ask them a few questions. I promise you that they shall not be of such a nature as to cause you the slightest pain.
Which of my servants did you wish to see?
Your maid and your parlour maid, if I may.
Here is your tea.
Thank you. And please call Dorothy and Lily here.
Right away, mum.
Tea?
Oh,
No, thank you.
As you wish.
Oh, hello. Oh, it's you again.
This woman wishes to ask you a few questions. Remember that she is a representative of the police, so you had better do your best to satisfy her with your answers.
What I am going to ask these 2 young ladies is neither very difficult nor very unpleasant. I merely want their kind help in a little comedy which will have to be played this evening in order to test the accuracy of certain statements made by one of the waitresses at Mathis Cafe with regard to the terrible tragedy which has darkened this house. You will do that much, will you not?
Of course, ma'am.
Whatever you need.
Excellent. First of all, you must know that the chief waitress at Mathis Cafe this very morning has identified the woman in the big hat who we all believe murdered Mr. Culloden. Yes, the girl seems quite positive, both as regards to the hat and the woman who wore it. But of course, one cannot allow a human life to be sworn away without bringing every possible proof to bear on such a statement. And I am sure that everyone in this house will understand that we don't want to introduce strangers more than we can help into this sad affair, which has already been bruited abroad too much. My superiors at Scotland Yard think it their duty to try and confuse the witness as much as possible in their act of identification. They desire that a certain number of ladies wearing abnormally large hats should parade before the waitress. Among them will be, of course, the one whom the girl has already identified as being the mysterious person who had tea with Mr. Culloden at Mathis Cafe that afternoon. My superiors can then satisfy themselves whether the waitress is or is not so sure of her statement that she invariably picks out again and again one particular individual amongst a number of others or not.
Surely you do not expect my servants to help in such a farce.
We don't look upon such proceedings as a farce, Lady Irene. It is often resorted to in the interest of the accused person, and we certainly would ask the cooperation of your household.
I don't see what they can do.
We'll help in any way we can.
Oh, we'd love to.
Please let us, Lady Irene.
Since we couldn't attend the inquest.
Or read the papers.
We just want to be of service.
Why couldn't you attend the inquest or read the papers?
I've tried to protect them from the gruesome details of this tragedy. It's not proper for young women to get mixed up in murder.
What can we do, Miss Detective?
Her name is Lady Molly Robertson-Kirk. Keep up.
I am sure both these young ladies possess fine big hats.
I should not allow them to wear ridiculous headgear.
I have the one your ladyship wouldn't wear and threw away. I put it together again with the scraps I found in the dust hole.
I don't know what you mean, Dorothy. I never wear big hats.
No, my lady, but Dorothy means the one you ordered at St. Shears and only wore the once, the day you went to that concert.
Which day was that?
Oh, I couldn't forget that day. Her ladyship came home from the concert. I had undressed her, and she told me that she would never wear her big hat again. It was too heavy.
The same day we met you.
The same day Mr. Culloden was murdered.
That hat should answer our purpose very well. Perhaps, Dorothy, you will go and fetch it. And Lily, you had better go and help her put it on.
Of course.
Right away, ma'am.
What are you going to do, Lady Irene?
You can't prove it.
I think we can. At any rate, I mean to try. I have 2 of the waitresses from Mathis Cafe outside in the cab, and I have already spoken to the attendant who served you at Sanchez. We know that you were at great pains there to order a hat of certain dimensions, and to your own minute description. It was a copy of one you had once seen Miss Lowenthal wear when you met her at your late husband's office, a week after she came to your house. We can prove that meeting too. Then we have your maid's testimony that you wore that same hat once, and only once, the day presumably that you went out to a concert, a statement which you will find it difficult to substantiate, and also the day on which your husband was murdered.
The public will laugh at you. You would not dare to formulate so monstrous a charge.
But the facts, Lady Irene, speak for themselves. There is the fact that you knew of Mr. Culloden's entanglement with Miss Elizabeth Lowenthal, and you did your best to keep it from old Mrs. Steinberg's knowledge, realizing that any scandal round her favourite nephew would result in the old lady cutting him, and therefore you, out of her will.
That's preposterous.
You dismissed a parlour-maid for the sole reason that she had been present when Miss Lowenthal was shown into Mr. Culloden's study.
You can't know.
There's the fact that Mrs. Steinberg had so worded her will that in the event of her nephew dying before her, her fortune would devolve on you. The fact that with Mrs. Lowenthal's action for breach of promise against your husband, your last hope of keeping the scandal from the old lady's ears had effectually vanished. You saw your fortune eluding your grasp. You feared Mrs. Steinberg would alter her will. Had you found the means, and had you dared, would you not rather have killed the old lady? But discovery would have been certain. The other crime was bolder, surer. You have inherited the old lady's millions, for she never knew of her nephew's earlier peccadillos. All this we can state and prove, and the history of the hat, bought and worn one day only, that same memorable day, and then thrown away.
There is one fact you have forgotten, my lady of Scotland Yard.
Oh? And what is that?
You'll figure it out soon enough. Tea, anyone?
Mary, smash her teacup.
Give that to me!
No! Give it back! No!
You can't escape justice, Lady Irene. Not while we're here.
What was in her teacup?
Morphia, I presume, disguised in the sugar bowl, from the same batch which she stole from her husband's office and used to kill him. Would you have put that in RT2, Lady Irene? Or was it a special treat for yourself? Inspector Saunders?
Come with me, ma'am.
You're a disgrace to women.
Thank you.
Come on, move along, my lady. Move.
Release me.
I still can hardly believe she's a murderer. What was it that first made you suspect her?
The big hat, of course. Had the mysterious woman at Mathis Cafe been tall, the waitresses would not one and all have been struck by the abnormal size of the hat. The wearer must have been petite, hence the reason that, under a wide brim only, a chin would be visible. I had once sought a small woman. Our fellows did not think of that because they are men.
We've returned!
I found the hat.
Where did Lady Irene go?
Is she very upset I kept the hat?
Perhaps a little, but don't concern yourselves.
You know, in a few years, you should both consider applying for the female department of Scotland Yard.
You think we could be detectives?
Ooh, Lily, we could be partners.
Just like the two of you.
Yes, just like us. Now, there's something I should tell you.
My dear lady had been right from beginning to end. With unerring precision, she had placed her dainty finger on the real motive and the real perpetrator of the crime. The ambitious woman who had married solely for money, and meant to have that money even at the cost of one of the most dastardly murders that have ever darkened the criminal annals of this country. Lady Irene has since made full confession. She was recommended to mercy on account of her sex, for better or worse. For as Lady Irene said herself, it's not proper for young women to get mixed up in murder.
This concludes tonight's broadcast of Lady Molly of Scotland Yard, The Murder at Mathis Cafe, adapted for our radio program by Julia Fisher from the stories of Baroness Emma Orczy. We would also like to recognize Technical Director Buddy Taylor, Managing Director and Sound Designer Tess Bergler, and Trevor Buddha for writing and creating the original theme music for the Quarantine Radio program. Look for these all-original classic radio plays live on our Facebook page each month. You can also listen to them at any time thereafter on our website at www.ohioshakespeare.com or find them at soundcloud.com/ohio-shakespeare-festival. These radio plays will remain free to the public, and Ohio Shakespeare will continue to pay our collaborating artists. If you would like to support these efforts, please consider joining our Patreon. All monies raised on our Patreon platform go right back into paying local actors and playwrights to produce these all-original radio productions. Visit www.patreon.com/ohioshakes. That's www.patreon.com/ohioshakes. Tune in next time for the exciting tale of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.